Trevor Moawad is one of the most highly regarded mental conditioning consultants on the planet. In Seattle, he's best known for working with quarterback Russell Wilson, who's quick to credit Trevor for helping him achieve great things on and off the field. And Trevor, before we get to Russ, if you had to describe what you do, how would you describe it?
You know, it's interesting. It's there's probably the only brand that I think people largely know is Tony Robbins. And I would say that anything in and around sports psychology or life coaching or business psychology or peak performance education probably looks like a first or second cousin of that. So somewhere in terms of helping somebody either maximize the human asset, which would be themselves, their mind, their body, or get from great to greater. I would say I spend a lot of time doing that. I think we think of psychology in many cases as being there's a problem and now we need to tackle it and improve it. I have never really worked in that industry. I have always been with really good performers and helped them get better. Since I started at IMG Academy in the early 2000s, and I've been doing this now, this is my 20th year as a full-time mental conditioning consultant. But it goes by a lot of names, Paul. But broadly speaking, helping people get to that next level, focusing more on the psychological assets in a real simple way.
But as much as you deal with people who have the mental capacity to absorb what you're telling them,
yeah,
those athletes and the people that you work with, they have to buy in, don't they?
Yes.
I mean, it's important.
Yeah, well, there is no, and I think that's why the industry, so I would say in 2000, when I was in my early 20s and I started at IMG Academy for Nick Bollettieri, the great tennis guru, sports psychology, mental conditioning was the future of sports. In 2020, it's still the future of sports, which means it never had a present. And some human performance elements. There was a great guy from Squim, Mark Verstegen, just sold his company for $450 million, who started Athletes Performance. And in the late 90s, you had functional training, which not everybody's going to train like a football player, but tennis players, baseball players, basketball players are going to train specific to those sports. And you had these new warm-ups and things, and it really took off. But you could see physical change. And then in I'd say 2008, 2009, nutrition, making fuel adjustments, Gatorade, is it in you, the will to win athlete, fueling for time, G2, all those different types of things. That really took off. You started to see adaptation of when I'm going to eat, why I'm going to eat, micro-nourishing, and then sports psychology, you just don't see it the same way. You don't see psychological change the way you see physiological change. So, and then I think the industry, truthfully, many of the people that work in it, A, there's not a lot of them, and B, most of them are not very good. So if you were to say, Trevor, can you hire 3 people, I'd tell you no.
Really?
And so sports psychology as an industry, I know the Seahawks have a very good one in Dr. Michael Gervais, who's a high-performance psychologist who would be different than me, who would probably focus on some different things more difficult, but we would be cousins. And there are some teams that have that. Pete was always ahead of the game. Pete used to work with the Pacific Institute, a Seattle-based company, and Lou Tice, who my father worked with in the 70s and 80s. And Pete's belief was you could coach the coaches to coach the players. My job has always been players, coaches, everybody. And so the buy-in is hard, particularly when you're working at the University of Alabama. So the message that you've probably heard Russell speaking is a little different than I think what you might see from a Tony Robbins mastery class.
Well, Russell is obviously one of your most popular clients in our area, but you work with a lot of different college programs. And
yeah.
I mean, can you put a number out there as far as clients and people you work with, and how in the world do you have the time to do all this?
Yeah, well, I mean, just, now it's duration, right? So once you get into your 40s, you've been around a while, so the client total adds up. But, I worked with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Miami Dolphins, Texas football, Alabama football, Florida State football, Michigan football, University of Georgia football. I've worked with many of the top tennis players, but I don't publicly have those relationships. I work in the military. I worked at Naval Special Warfare, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Recently, we started a business called Limitless Minds, where we actually said, can you take the way we train athletes to the business community? And
But
so
that's something you work. That's you and Russell, correct?
Russell and I together started this company called Limitless Minds with his brother Harrison and another partner named DJ. And it was interesting. Goldman Sachs hosted this event for us in Seattle, where we took 15 of the top most successful business people in the state of Washington. And Russell basically just said, "This is Trevor. This is what we talk about." And for 2 hours, I just talked to them, and it was all things that they'd never really heard, and just said, "Is there a business in this?" Because we don't teach positive thinking. I don't teach meditation, right? I think that's for yoga teachers, and the power of positive thinking, I think, has made this industry compete against itself in a negative way. I think when you're always telling people to be positive when they're facing the challenges that life throws at us daily, it's not difficult. So it becomes very difficult. So what we've really focused on is minimizing negativity and learning how to think neutrally. And that's just not heard of, right? Now I have my first book coming out. Russell wrote the foreword for it. I have a copy of it. I'll sneak it since we're filming it.
Okay.
Because I was smart of it. I'll give you a...
And the name of the book is It Takes What It Takes.
It Takes What It Takes. And
Russell wrote the foreword.
Russell wrote the foreword, yep. And actually we just did the Audible book, and he finished it today. But we have it right here. It Takes What It Takes with the foreword by Russell Wilson. And this is actually the follow-up. The person that edited this book, Shannon Welch, the last book she edited was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. So this is a really cool opportunity. This is with HarperCollins. And so it's awesome. And I had never been allowed really to have social media or a consumer-facing brand in all those years working at Alabama and in the special operations community. There is no Twitter, there's no self-promotion. And it's funny because that's been the thing that's been so hard for us with this book, and why we're so open to doing these things with you, Paul, is nobody has a clue who I am. And that I never cared. And when people would ask me, I'd be at Alabama and somebody'd see me on the sideline, "Who are you, man?" I'd say, "I'm an intern for Reebok." Because it didn't really matter. Because Nick Saban knew who I was, Jimbo Fisher knew who I was, Mac Brown knew who I was, Kirby Smart knew who I was, so it didn't really matter. But now when you're trying to sell a book, it matters. And when you're trying to build a business, a B2C business in Seattle, Limitless Minds, it matters. People need to know that Russell actually trains this, and our mission has always been from great to greater. And all my years at Alabama working for Nick Saban, our biggest psychological focus was on our best players. And nobody thinks about it that way. But if your best players don't perform the best, you're not going to win, right?
Well, Russell's he is that guy, and so hearing you talk is the stuff we've heard him say in front of that
I know,
podium.
people always say how similar we are.
But the cool thing is that he does buy into it, and it does work for him. And when people say they're looking for other comments from him, he says the same things over and over because that's how he lives. That's how he lives.
But if you teach this in such a way, Paul, where there's nothing about, if somebody was to come or get, we haven't really done open events, but when we start to do more open events and things along those lines, there is no option but buying in, right? I'm not asking you to go on top of a mountain and breathe. I'm not asking you to be positive. The data in and around negativity from the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic, negativity and the verbalization of negativity, the consumption, you watch 3 minutes of cable news, you increase your probability by 27% that at the end of the day you'll say you had a terrible day. Okay? The consumption of country music, old country, new country, the consumption of any type of negative content, and then the externalization of negative words. I hate my job. I don't like working here. Just the externalization of it increases the probability by a multiple of 70 times that what you don't want to have happen will happen. So when we teach and when we talk this idea of minimizing negativity and learning how to go to neutral, there's nothing hard about buying. What are you going to deny that negativity or slaying yourself with a knife with your own words is going to help? I'm not asking you to be positive. I'm not asking, like Russell, that's what people always confuse with Russell. Russell and Tom Brady sound exactly the same. They focus on behaviors, not outcomes. Russell never talks. Russell at the end of the game will say, my goal is to win, in the same way like Jeter, but all he's focusing on during the game is competing, keeping your pad level low. DK, run good routes, keep your hands low. DJ, explode off the things that you can do that lead to winning as opposed to winning. Positive thinking is always tied to an outcome. That's why people don't buy it. I'm not making any money. Now you're telling me to think about making money? No, think about the behaviors that give you a chance to succeed, and ultimately, in the long term, if you do them over a period of time, will make money. That task orientate, and Russell doesn't sound any different than Jim Lovell, 205,000 feet away from the Earth when the Apollo 13 blew up, and he had to say, okay, he couldn't go to negative, but he also couldn't think about landing. He had to think about, can we still circle the Earth? Can we still circle the moon? Can we still land? Okay, what can we do? All right, can we find food? How do we take the carbon monoxide? Do other things. So for years, Russell and I, we've studied Jim Lovell. We've studied Michael Phelps. We've studied Drake. We've studied LeBron James. We've studied Derek Jeter. We've studied Michael Jordan. We do case studies over and over again. I find all the data. I get all the interviews, and we talk about what makes them great, and that's what we do. So it doesn't require buy-in. When you're doing some message that I don't know what it is, whatever the stereotype is of Mac Foley down by the river, I've been raised in it my whole life, the Tacoma Golf Country Club. My dad would miss a golf shot that said, hey, with all the positive thinking wasn't helping you, Bob Moawad. I've seen it my whole life, so I got it. But while positive thinking can't be proven to work all the time, negative thinking does work, and it works all the time. And if you hear Russell, you will never catch negativity. And if you're a negative person, you will not live in his life. He will not keep you in his life. Negative people, he doesn't have any time for them. And crazy thing, all the stuff with the Legion of Boom and all the things that had different personalities, like nothing bothers him. And I've never heard him complain about the lack of resources the team has. He's never said one thing about the offensive line, ever. 2 years ago when he led the team in every category, you never heard him say anything about anything outside of take care of his body, do what he's got to do. It takes what it takes.
Okay, this is a huge question, but when you talk about Russell and working with Russell, how many hours a week would you say you work with him, or is that fair? And then give us a typical routine of what you would do with him.
Yeah, not to get into everything, but typically, depending on the schedule, a lot of times over the years, right? It's been 8 years, and sometimes there's different circumstances or I'm more tied up with a program. But normally, I would say I get up on Thursdays, and then we have sort of a game plan, something we're going to watch in his theater room while he's working on his body. What people don't know is every free moment Russell has, he's working on his body.
Physically and mentally.
Yeah, but physically for sure. So in order to do what he does, it doesn't happen by accident. Nothing happens by accident. So he has businesses that he's, so first of all, in all my years, I've never seen somebody spend more time in a building. And I've been around Nick and Jimbo and all those guys. And, Russell gets in there really, really early, 5:36, and then he gets back late. And he's kind of had variations of that over the course of his career. But then I would get there on a Thursday, and then around 8 o'clock at night, we would meet probably for an hour and a half, and I would come in and we'd do it and grab dinner and then go. Now, the different part is we're friends. And as much as I know Russell knows me. And as much as I can challenge him, he's challenged me. There's been some adversity in my life that's been self-inflicted, where he saw it coming and confronted me and challenged me on it. When we went to Hawaii, we took the team to Hawaii after the second Super Bowl. We went together and spent a lot of time not just working with the whole team and Russ, Cam Chancellor, Doug, and I, like coordinating the schedule, but over the period of time, you develop friendships, particularly when a guy's 31 and you're in your early or mid 40s. It's not that different. College football players are 19 or 20. So, but I would say we text message probably every day. We talk on the phone multiple times when he's driving. He'll call his agent, Mark Rogers, who's probably one of his closest friends, and then I'll get him on the way back or whatever. A private number will pop up. When private number pop up, it's either Robbie Cano, Russell Wilson, Nick Saban, or it's really any of those three. And Robbie's a really good friend of mine too, and I spent a lot of time with Robbie over the years. When I'd come up to see Russell, I would also come up to see Robbie, which a lot of people didn't know about.
So on game day, is it different? Do you try to see Russ every game day? Is that impossible?
No, so it just depends on the games. Like the schedule's worked out. So for many years, I've had a kid from Lakewood, Washington, that never played football, right? Played basketball and soccer at Occidental. I've had a chance to be in 8 national championship games. So normally I would be busy up until this weekend. And so we played in the Sugar Bowl with Georgia. So I've had a chance to be at the last couple weekends. But I'm actually not a football fan or a sports fan. I probably watch more HGTV. If I was to watch, I watch MLS. When I watch sports, most of my buddies now are kind of in their early 40s, like the Benny Olsons and Jason Kreis and Pablo Mastroeni. All those guys are coaching now. So
You're a soccer fan. You'd watch soccer on TV.
I'd watch MLS if my friends who were coaching were coaching, and then I watch football. The teams, I love the competitiveness of football, and then Russell, I just love Russell. Russell is everything aspirationally that I think my dad was teaching, and then I think what I've learned to teach. If Russell would have never met me, he would still be in this exact moment. I think I've been able to be a force multiplier in his life, but he's the ultimate personification of you don't need to have problems to get better. Think about if we approached our life where we don't need to be sick to get better. So many people in any area of their life, we attack our health based upon when we're unhealthy. We attack our marriage. I saw a statistic that 2 years ago that the average married couple communicates 27 minutes a week directly. And I have my buddies like, that much? What I found all the time, right? But you think about that, you're not born being good at that. That's making the time. Success leaves clues. So it's been over the years, I first saw Russ in 2008 when Florida State, we played them, 2009, we played them at Florida State. Russ threw for 500 yards, Christian Ponder threw for 500 yards. We won on the final play. Next year, 2010, we were like 4 in the country. We went to NC State, and he beat us single-handedly, scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And I saw Mark Stoops and Jimbo Fisher fighting over this guy, and I remember asking, what's this guy? And he's like, Russell Wilson, this guy's incredible. You watch what he does. That's Jimbo Fisher, the highest paid coach in the history of college football, $75 million guaranteed. You should hear these guys talk about him, but nobody, and then he ends up at Wisconsin and does what he does. And then as evaluating draft picks for 8 years, I worked for the Jacksonville Jaguars for 8 seasons. Physiologically, I understood why he was a third-round pick. The height thing is a real thing, and I think it's going to catch up with Kyler Murray. I think Lamar Jackson's going to be RG3. I think that there are very few people like Russell that have this skill set that are capable of overcoming the height issue. You talk to him and say, well, I'm a shortstop, and I can do this, I see through lanes, and you'll walk away, and then you're like, none of that's true. Like he is overcoming physiological things that years and years and years of data have proven that 6'4", 230, and 11-inch arms, and 11.5-inch hands. Now he had a lot of those other anthropometrics, but he is just an anomaly. He's a Kobe. He's a LeBron. He's those people that the young people that I met, like the Freddie Adu's, the Michelle Wees, the Maria Sharapovas, that they're gifted in everything.
When you talk about Russ, when was the first time? Did he reach out to you, or did you reach out to him? How did that happen?
So his agent, Mark Rogers, had brought Andrew Miller, a big left-handed pitcher, to me, who we were able to really help get back on track. And to me, I always laugh because Mark will always give me all this credit, but when you're 6'7", left-handed, and you throw 95, I think people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So Mark called me and said, I have a client, Russell Wilson, I'd like to potentially bring to IMG Academy to train for the draft. Chris Winkie and I, former NFL quarterback, former college quarterback, Chris Winkie and I talked, and Russell came with Ryan Tannehill, Kirk Cousins, and Bobby Wagner, and 35 other guys, including Luke Kuechly, to train for the draft. First time I met Russell, Russell said, I came here not just to learn all this other thing, but I came to work with you. And so he spent multiple hours with me, going through Drew Brees, watching old videotapes I had of Brees talking about the draft when Drew Brees was 21 years old too. and then we just built a relationship. And you meet him the first time. I get why people are like, is this for real? Like when he does the interviews and he's so polished and all those things. But all I can tell you is when I met him at 22, he was just like that. And at 31, he's exactly the same. And when he was 19 and we first played him against NC State, he was just like that. So what do you mean? So that must mean that's who he is.
Clearly. And we've seen that over 8 years in Seattle. But when you talk about his schedule all day, getting in early, leaving late, you've had a little taste of his family life. Let me just ask you this, and if it's not too intrusive, how does Ciara handle his schedule? Because and his kids too.
I think they've done an incredible. I think that is a great example of a win-win synergy. First of all, she's amazing. To getting a chance to meet her and spend time with her, she's been incredible. And I think they're a relationship that's really synergized where they're both pointed the same direction. So I think what I learned in college football from Nick Saban and from Jim McElwain and from all those guys is it's not the volume of time, it's the quality of time. And I think what you see with them is there's a real depth to their relationship and there's a real quality of time. And I think they find large chunks where she can be with him and then in the off season he can be with her. And he created a human performance team that can travel with him. So anything he could get at a VMAC, he can get on the road at a concert in a hotel and train and do everything he needs to do. Because the one thing that the collective bargaining agreement did is it ruined a lot of guys' careers. Because you have 4 months where you can't train. So what are you going to do? You're not trained professionally. Like Tony Romo would play basketball. Well, that didn't help him. That shortened his career. You know, like you need to train at a world-class level. So he brings his world-class training. So he's with her in the off-season. I just think that he's he does it way better than me. I was not good at figuring out how to spend time with family. And he's confronted me on that, saying you should be better at it. And he is better at it. He's just done a really good job of it. All I can tell you is, you asked me that question, I'd never even thought about it because it seems like they always spend time together.
You've worked with a lot of college football programs, and I wanted to bring this up. When it happened, I thought about you because I've been chasing you down for months, as you know.
Yeah.
Cougars led UCLA 49-17 midway through the third quarter, way back in the fall. Bruins rally and win it 67-63. So they blew this huge lead.
Yep.
How do you coach an athlete back from a loss like that? Because you're talking about teenagers and 20-year-olds as opposed to someone that's, a professional athlete. Is that a fair question? Like,
right, with that whole Cougar thing. And Ryan Leaf's a good buddy of mine. And Ryan will, would love it because I was texting with Chip. Chip and I have been friends for a long time. Chip Kelly after that because I watched it. I was in Georgia. They were playing, I don't know if it was a Friday night game or whatever, or it was the night game, and we had played earlier in the day. I think we'd beaten Notre Dame maybe. And I watched it, and I was like, they're going to come back and win this thing. But the idea of neutral thinking is that the past is real. Where positive thinking is really hard for people is it requires that when something bad happens, they immediately have to pretend it didn't and go to the fact that it's okay. It's not okay. So if you blow a 40-point lead, it's not okay. And there are things that you did and the reasons, and you need to be frustrated and upset. But the past is real, but it's not predictive. And that's where negativity leads to catastrophizing, where because that happened, it's going to continue to happen, and we're going to have a 6 and 7 season. And the fact that this happened, look at where we were in the first half. The second half, we got away from this. They got momentum. We own it. We're accountable for it. But who we are next is based upon what we do, not what just happened. And that's where athletes are really important. Tennis players, baseball players, basketball players, a pitcher. I worked for the Mets this last season, and a pitcher gives up 8 runs in an inning. You own it. There's something you did, and then momentum happened, but that doesn't define who you are. You throw 5 picks, or you throw 4 picks through 57 minutes. Well, you own that, but the next 3 minutes live independently from the first 57 minutes. So if you get an onside kick and you have some opportunities, you can tie a game up. You can go up 22-19, tie to 22-22, and win 28-22. And that's where I think each moment has a history and life of its own. And it's hard to learn how to do that. But if you learn to accept the past as being real but not predictive, We hope It Takes What It Takes is going to bring neutral thinking. Our whole lives, Paul, we've been raised with the idea that if you're not negative, you got to be positive. What if I can't be positive? I think if you're not negative, you need to go to neutral. Like a car, when a car's going backwards, whoa, downshift, get to neutral. You can't go to forward right away. I think Russell has an incredible ability, and I think people at Washington State or Chris Peterson fans now that what's going to happen, hey, Jimmy Lake may be great, but he hasn't done anything, right? And the guy's got an ego the size of 8 mountains. So Chris Peterson was humble. He was a gentleman, what he did. And I'm just saying what you hear around college football, that what have you done? So what have you done is going to be based upon what you currently go out and do. So Washington fans are going to have to brace themselves. And I'm a big Jacob Eason fan. I just talked to him 2 days ago. He's down in California getting ready for the draft. But who are the Huskies going to be going forward? And now your new basketball program, you lost your best player to academic ineligibility. So all right, so who's going to step up? Who's going to go into that position? Again, who we become is based upon what we do, not what just happened.
That's a great message for everybody. I mean, in life, period.
I think it is, and I think sports are a microcosm of life. They're a publicly traded commodity on Saturdays at 5:40 or 4:40. But again, they're not. When I always laugh because I'll go speak. So on Tuesday for Limitless Minds, I'm going to go speak to Johnson & Johnson, big pharmaceutical company, and I'll have their top executives. And I'll always have to defend in the beginning being a sports guy, as if sports is not a business. Sports is the ultimate business, where the best are promoted by winning. And it's an EBITDA-driven business where if you don't go out and perform well, then nobody makes money, and your advertisers don't make money, and the brand doesn't make money, and your sport doesn't make money, so you're out. And once you get a locker, there's already 25 people. If Russell doesn't play well next season, the Seahawks owe him no more money. They might take a cap hit, but they don't owe him anything. So sports is a business, and psychologically, people that have learned to perform and perform at a high level, psychologically understanding the ups and downs of sports, if you can take that to your business world, the average 8.5-hour day, Paul, you get 4 hours of employee productivity. And if an employee is going through an emotional problem like a health scare, financial distress, or a divorce, it's 1.5 hours per 8.5-hour days. That's 17%. Who can run a business with 17% efficiency out of your employees? Wouldn't work in sports, doesn't work in the business world. The business world should shut their mouth and listen a lot from the sports world because they can learn a lot if they listen to more people that understand. These executive coaches, and I'm sure they do a good job, could learn a lot from the sports world.
Tell me about the book, It Takes What It Takes. Like, that sounds like something that would come out of Russell's mouth, but
Yep.
Did you come up with that title, and what do you mean by that?
So the title actually came up from Vince Carter. So I was the mental conditioning consultant for the Memphis Grizzlies. And the book talks about this, and we were getting ready to play. We had just played a game, and Vince Carter, the basketball player, was a huge fan. Vince at that point was 37. Now he's 42 and still playing. And a bunch of our players at Alabama had randomly over a period of time made some mistakes. And Vince was asking me the question, do all those guys want to play in the NFL? And I said, we have a high percentage of guys that want to play in the NFL. And he says, isn't it crazy that they think they can do whatever they want and make it? I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, do you think I can do whatever I want at 37 years old and play in the NBA? I haven't ate fast food in years. I don't dunk as often because it takes me longer to recover. I don't eat certain things, and I sleep a certain way and all these things. And he said, the choices are finite that I have to follow to play at 37 years old. And I said, what do you mean, choice is an illusion? He said, yeah, choice is an illusion. He said, it takes what it takes. So I was getting ready to go to Alabama, and I kind of talked to Coach Saban about there are no choices. You've been in your industry a long time. Steve Rabel's been in his industry a long time. Dave Wyman or Brock Heward or any of these different type of people that are good at what they do, or Chris Egan. Okay, I may maybe being real kind if I'm saying Chris is good at what he does.
I'll edit that out.
I love Chris, and I think Chris is really good. I'm just having some fun with the Eags. But there's a path that you follow. There's things that you have to do with your family. There's things that you give up. There's things that you commit to. There's hours that you wake. And there's nothing wrong if you don't do those. But you can't not do those and be good. And that was his point. So ultimately it became this sort of famous Nick Saban speech where he talked about the illusion of choice, that there really aren't choices because it takes what it takes. And so ultimately it kind of came from Vince. I passed it forward. The idea was a common sense idea, but I think we have an infinite amount of choices. How many kids and how many businesses have been hurt by thinking, I can go to bed anytime? Of course you can if you want to be average. But average people become average through average behavior, not average aptitude. And great people become great through great behavior, not great aptitude. Russell has incredible aptitude, but his behavior is so far ahead of his success. Let me grab a...
We're just about done. I just have one question.
Average people become average through average aptitude, or average people become average through average behavior, not average aptitude. And you become great through great behavior. Russell, one of the neat things is his behavior was way ahead before he ever became who we're talking about now. He was doing all the things that allow you to become that. And that's where people don't want to do that. But sometimes, Paul, it's the things that we don't do, that we don't watch, that we don't eat, that we don't hang out with, that we don't consume, that are our most important things. As the new year comes around, what are 5 things you could not do that would help you? Right? The self-help industry has been so full of getting people to do more things, right? And what bothers me about the self-help industry is the self-help industry never talks about helping others. It's always helping yourself. And I want the industry to be more about helping others, and I want people to know that it's simple. Everything Russell and I just talked about today before a pretty big game, there's nothing complicated, right? And the athletes don't care that you went to Harvard. They don't care what school you went to. They don't care. I mean, people that buy books, who knows if anyone's going to buy this book, but what school they go to, who cares? Does the message resonate and does it make sense? That's the great thing about the world I've lived in. Because when I get in front of the 120 kids in Alabama in 2007, when they've never even heard of somebody like me and it's Nick Saban's first year, then I've got a short window of time. First time I got in front of Tom Coughlin said, my 40 years of coaching, never did I think I'd be sitting across somebody like you. And he wasn't saying it to compliment me. He told me I had 4 minutes. And that's the world we live in. And I love it. Because my dad, who was a great Washingtonian, and when he passed away, his obituary was in the Seattle Times, and he was a state championship coach and a man of the year in Tacoma. That's how he wanted me to know. Like, it takes what it takes. It's not that complicated. People can change, but there's nothing wrong with people staying the same if they're comfortable with where they're at.
I think there's just great messages in this conversation with you. The name of the book is It Takes What It Takes, which is totally worth reading. I think the power of neutral thinking is really, it is powerful. And I think starting that new year and going into this new year, I think it's really enlightening to think, what can you drop off of your schedule or the things that you eat, or things you don't do to help you instead of things you can do to help you. I think that's a great message.
And don't say. Like, think about what your language is. I mean, people talk about Russell's language throughout the game is focusing on the things that we need to do to be successful. But he's also not saying certain things after things so when the day didn't go well and you come home, if you say, well, what, am I supposed to hold it in? Yes, shut your mouth. Because anytime you say something out loud, you increase its strength by 10, and if it's negative, it's a multiple of 4 to 7 times. So the data from Harvard Business Review and Georgetown says the externalization of negativity is 40 to 70 times more powerful than if you just said nothing. But if you just say positive things, it doesn't have anywhere near the power. So what you've learned, is rather than be more positive, it's so much better to be what? Less negative.
Man. It's awesome, man. I mean, I never thought I'd sit here with you for 30, 40 minutes and learn something from you, but I feel like I just got a free speech from you.
I don't get a lot of time, man. I live in a world where I don't, first of all, I don't make the money of the Tony Robbins. Those dudes can stand on their wallets and talk to the clouds. And I've really picked a world, and it's not like I'm a monk, but I picked a world where there is no sports psychology industry. There are no jobs. So to be one of the handful of people that work with teams or get to be in a moment like this, to be in a stadium like this, or to be walking under the Rose Bowl in the national championship. I've been on the sideline for 4 Rose Bowls. A kid from Lakewood that went to a Charles Wright Academy with a graduating class of 47 kids. And that's not lost on me. And I don't sound as much like I'm from Washington anymore because I lived all that time in the South. But I take huge pride in being from Tacoma and growing up a Sonics fan, even though once they fired George Karl, I was never a fan anymore. But I did end up spending a season working with Oklahoma City, which was pretty cool when we had Westbrook. And I know he was, I think, one of our last guys drafted. But what a great city, what great people, what a great community. And the way they've gathered these 12s, the way they're almost like an SEC fan base, but not quite as crazy.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's no death totals like after an Alabama-Auburn game, which are some things I've experienced. So I think the book, what's cool about the book is it's going to go this little kid from Lakewood. First of all, it tells the story of after the Super Bowl. What happened the day after the Super Bowl, the second Super Bowl, and the plan we put together in order to rebuild him and for him to just have his best offseason so he would follow it up with the best season of his career and then follow that up with the season where he led the NFL in touchdowns after a moment where most people thought it would bury him.
Man, I got to ask you this because you brought it up, but everybody looks at these plays like Bill Buckner goes through his legs and they slam Bill Buckner for decades.
Yeah.
I thought Pete Carroll took a lot of crap for calling that play or for allowing that play to happen. Russ threw that ball and tried to force it in there, and it felt like he didn't get a lot of the flack for throwing that ball. Pete got it for not handing it to Marshawn Lynch.
Well, Russ said, put the blame on me.
Yes.
It was in my hand. And,
yes.
And so I think the moment, being with those guys, particularly in Hawaii, we had this really cool plan. The story of taking that team to Hawaii was awesome. But it never defined him. And because I think it's more so because he didn't let it define him. Look at what Cam did the next year in that press conference. Cam's never recovered. Cam walked out of that press conference in a moment where he had really more of a pretty bad game. Russell had a really good game in the last play. The truth is Malcolm Butler made a great play. Russell threw a fastball. There was no choke response. It was whop, and the guy made a play.
He did.
You know? And so and at the end of the day, being in the Super Bowl is a big deal. It was never going to be a Scott Norwood moment.
Yeah. But in that book, It Takes What It Takes, you guys address that a little bit, huh? And that's cool for people to know.
We focus on what was going to move him past it, which was the best offseason of his career. We never spoke about it. Yeah. And to this day, we've never talked about it. And again, the externalization of it gives it power. He evaluated it on Monday, he got his grade, he understood, he knew what he did, and he moved on, just like he did when they won 50-8 the year before. He got his grade, he did this stuff, and then we just talk about where we lived, what decisions we made, who trained him, what was going to give him the best opportunity, how he responded, and then the beginning of his second life in San Diego, which started 12 days after the Super Bowl when he started retraining already for the next season 12 days later.
All that guy does is win.
Seattle natives are going to love this. It's crazy because I've enjoyed doing more of these things because nobody ever knows I'm from Washington. And I always take great pride. I've never done, I've been on Sirius, I do all the radio shows, and nationally I've been on ESPN and all the things, but I've never done really anything locally outside of Egan, who's my buddy, and then Brock Heward, who's my buddy. And then people who I kind of grew up with, and Brock's the same age, Egan's the same age. And so I love those PR boys.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you spending some time with us, man. Thanks a lot, Trevor.
Thanks. Go Hawks.